Hello, welcome. I'm Mark Klein, SVP of Sales for Control Case. I'm joined by Eric Levitas, our VP of Business Development for Federal here at Control Case. We're excited to take a few minutes today and talk with you guys about compliance audits. The title is "What to Expect When Expecting a Compliance Audit." We're going to get into a couple different things today around agenda. Some known facts in the MSP space where we kind of get into compliance security vectors. We'll do an introduction to general compliance. We'll also talk about how MSPs are arming themselves around compliance auditing, and then as well as your customers. And then we're going to do kind of a workshop, walk through a compliance audit called CMMC, which has been a hot topic in the space the last couple months. We're going to walk through sort of a use case of that, what to expect, timelines, how to manage that audit, one for yourself as an MSP, but also for one of your customers if you get requests for that. So let's start general kind of facts. So this is the scary slide. There's breaches. MSPs are constantly breached, and your customers are under attack. There's no secret here. You guys know this information. Security incidents are on the rise, especially for third-party vendors, as well as just general attack vectors that we see every day. It's a common theme. This is not a secret to anyone here on this meeting today and presentation. To outline kind of the top attack vectors we see, third-party software vulnerabilities continue to be in the top four. Cloud misconfiguration, general phishing, but then number one is always compromised credentials, and continues to be for the last several years. It's tough to guard against the human element. Policies and procedures, how you handle data, it's all becomes to the human element at some point.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to make sure that we talk through, and it's kind of the common theme of how a company like us, Control Case, supports you guys and your clients, but it's something we're hoping people think about: people, processes, and technology, right? So those are the three areas within a business that can help it function and thrive, and it can also destroy a business, right? So your people, you need to have buy-in from them, but you need to have buy-in that they're trained the right way, they're thinking the right way, they're investing the right way, they're doing the right things. Without them, you can't put the right processes and technology in place. But with them, they could also, unknowingly destroy the operations. People, prevent audits from passing all the time. Processes, you have to have the correct business functions, policies, procedures. As we get into some of these hot button audits, the policy and the procedure is king. Without them, you can't. How do you know if something happens, then what? What if I get hit by the lottery bus tomorrow? Then what, right? And then technology, and you, the MSP, we are not an MSP. We rely on MSPs like you guys. You have to have the right technology stack. You have to put the right security credentials in place. You have to be able to prevent incidents. You have to be able to prevent intrusions. And technology aligned with processes, aligned with people. That's the idea of what we're trying to ensure, especially when you guys are going through an audit. You got to have all three of those things in line.
Yep. Yes. So quick introduction to general compliance for those who've not been through a compliance audit before. There's 30 plus different acronyms of security frameworks that we'll dig into a couple here in a few minutes. But to boil it down, you've got a security compliance and compliance with security requirements intended to ensure the attention is being placed on cyber risk and reduction of cyber risk. And then you have privacy, compliance with privacy requirements, focus on the rights of individuals, control the data for whatever intended use, right? Most of security frameworks kind of fall within both of these buckets, whether it's formal or informal compliance programs. These two general concepts are built on a lot of the different compliance security frameworks. Just depends on what type of data is at rest, or what you're trying to protect. So the goals, the term, compliance doesn't equal security. Security doesn't equal compliance is 100% true. Security is more of the act of doing. So you're providing solutions, software, You're guarding against attacks, reducing security events, unexpected losses. Compliance is more of a let's identify the gaps, let's work towards a security program, to a general framework that's needed, whether it's PCI or SOC or CMMC, based on what information needs to be protected, what framework is in need. It's also to build trust and confidence with your customers, with your partners, with your insurance company, and then providing accepted evidence of your security practices. Right. Again, there's 30 plus different security acronyms and audits out there. When you look at different regulations versus standards and certifications, some of the top ones you're going to hear is SOC 2, PCI DSS, which handles credit card information, HITRUST, CMMC, which we'll get into here in a few minutes, federal programs such as FedRAMP, HIPAA for healthcare data. There's a lot. It can be very confusing and overwhelming. Each acronym sort of has its own framework, and it's built off multiple standards, multiple kind of frameworks, but they all each generally kind of follow the same process for the most part. Some do differ. Again, when you're looking at what compliance framework do I need to go for, or it's typically what your customers are asking you for. Whether you have a new customer or you're in competition with another MSP down the street that says, hey, they've got a SOC 2 certificate, do you have that? A lot of that's predicated by your customers or even your sales team who are getting questions in the field about general compliance frameworks. And then it's what you're portraying to the outside world. What type of customers do you have? What type of data they have? What type of data do you control as an MSP? And you can set yourself on a path to go down really any of these certifications. I would recommend looking at some of your customer base, what you're hearing in the market, what your salespeople and customers are asking for in the market, and go down the path that makes most sense for you. There's been a lot of changes, in general for compliance last couple of years, but we're still seeing small, medium-sized businesses, asking for compliance requirements. 20 years ago, it was large companies kind of being required. Now we're seeing smaller companies get requested, cyber liability insurance requests from insurance agencies, customers asking. If you're an MSP and you're on this, you've probably received a document from a prospect or customer that they want you to fill out. It's about a 30-page document of how you're processing, handling data. Each time you receive that, you got to fill it out. That could be supplemented with a third-party compliance audit. There's certainly, increase in breaches and ransomware. We talked about that. That's not going away. The other thing to think about is, your own MSP structure and where you're at in your life cycle of your company, how many employees you have, how that data is being transferred through your company, and just looking at an overall compliance program and start somewhere is sort of the advice I would provide, is looking at your data, how you're handling, what customers you have, and then building a security framework that makes sense for your business, and then how you can service that for your customers as well. A question we get a lot is, how long does an audit take? And the answer is it's never stops. Unfortunately, it's not a one and done. Most audits, assessments are annual certifications you have to go through every year. They're not easy. It takes time. You have to prepare. You have to gather documentation that has to be reviewed. Sometimes there's a review period within certain frameworks. It can take months. It's not a 2-week project or 4-week project. It's ongoing. And typically how these cycles work, you have to keep up with the security framework throughout the year. So you'll start down a compliance journey pathway. It may take 6, 8, 10, 12 months, and then you're turning around and starting it again. It does get easier after you've done 1 or 2, the frameworks, you get used to it. Your team understands what evidence needs to be collected, what manner it needs to be collected and portrayed to the auditor. So as you do more, it does get easier, but it is certainly not a one and done. It's an ongoing process and will be part of your security frameworks moving forward. So.
Yes. So one thing we want to make sure is when you guys are jumping up against compliance standards, you have to ensure that everybody's on board, right? You have to make sure that the compliance discussion is involved in your budget discussion. You have to ensure that you're thinking early when you're having these discussions. Like Mark said, some of these audits are annual, biannual, triannual. You're going to have to ensure when you guys are having these discussions and when audits come up with your clients, how are they positioning the audit or the compliance framework, right? So are they dealing with multiple regulations? Is that multiple audits that they have to handle within 1 year? How are they managing the information? Are they housing it in one place? Is there multiple people involved? Is there multiple budgets that need to be pulled from? Keeping up with changing regulations and compliance requirements. ISO just updated, right? PCI, CMMC is constantly updating. So you might have had a standard that was, okay a year ago, but now they're giving you a timeline to update and make sure that your standard is up to date with the newest standard, right? So making sure that you're keeping up with that, understanding and translating the compliance frameworks. Again, working with the right partners, making sure you're understanding the questions that are being asked. You're not making objective opinions about it. You're making really sound decisions about it. You want to understand that what the question is asking you this, you need to be able to show this documentation, this policy and procedure. You need to be able to prove it. You're not just saying, yeah, we do that, yeah. And then when the auditor comes and goes, now prove it to me, you go, but we do it. It's not good enough, right? The lack of visibility into your compliance posture. Cyber hygiene is the most important thing, right? Like you need to make sure that everybody's got eyes on it, everybody has buy-in, and you're spending time to prepare. At the end of the day, if you struggle with these things, which a lot do, you need to have conversations with partners like us, partners like you, adjacent partners that are focused on compliance to get these issues handled and start the conversation immediately to ensure that whatever audit you're going after, there is a clear and consistent path to success. Because when you get in bed with an auditor, we expect a lot. You do not want to get into a conversation and go, I'm not ready. We don't want to charge you money, and then you fail and you have to restart. Because God forbid you have a contract or you have a client or an insurance policy that's expecting you to have that specific framework. You lose that client, you lose that opportunity. That we want to prevent that at all costs. Mm-hmm. So we're going to kind of do a little kind of workshop here. Me specifically, when I came on to Control Case, my background is CMMC, right? So I was lucky enough to work with companies that created training, lucky enough to work with companies that were formal auditors. Control Case is a part of that conversation, and we're supporting companies on this journey. And the one thing that I was able to be a part of is I was able to listen to a lot of people talk about like this crazy CMMC journey and what it entails, right? So one thing we're going to workshop kind of a CMMC audit. But before that, I kind of want to talk about who are the people that you're going to engage with, right? You got to have the executive team buy-in. You have to ensure that the executive team understands what the framework is asking for, who is required from the company to be a part of that framework, and ultimately what budget goes into that framework. You need to make sure what controls are being asked for and how they're being asked. In that instance, you're going to have to understand what the security posture of the company is currently. Do you have current standards in place? Have you done audits in the past? What metrics can you align yourself to, and how can you compare with others in your ecosystem, right? And ultimately ensure that you guys have an efficient, reduced timeline and productivity, and all that stuff. So the audience of the people that you guys are engaging with, all of your clients are going to be asking for, I need to make sure I have a set timeline. And if we're going to use CMMC as a specific example, I have an end goal that I'm trying to reach. I have a path that I'm trying to get to reach that what success looks like for me. You can't disrupt my business operations too much. I don't have all the money in the world. And ultimately, I've never done this before. So if you're butt up against that type of opportunity, and then maybe executive team doesn't have buy-in, you might have buy-in from the COO, but not the CEO. Understanding your audience is pivotal in making sure they understand that an audit is not 2 weeks, like Mark said. An audit is not $5,000 like everybody thinks it is. And an audit is not something that you could just jump into. It takes an immense amount of preparation, an immense amount of, it's a teamwork effort. It's us engaging with you to support them. At the end, it's a win-win-win. If we can all align on those goals, we could support the end client. So this is just, one thing we wanted to make sure that was justified in this presentation is maturity, right? You have, and again, specifically CMMC, cybersecurity maturity model certification. It's listed in the title. All of these security audits are asking for security. If you go after a SOC 2, type 1 is a point in time. Type 2 requires maturity. If you go after CMMC, every 3 years, I'm going to look at maturity. You have to be able to justify budget. You have to be able to justify what a blueprint looks like on a success plan to what good looks like. And you have to be able to put it in place with your team, have complete buy-in to ensure that your systems are mature. All of these audits are going to require maturity. It is not a lot of, it is not a point in time type of thing. It is again, Mark said, an annual, biannual, triannual type of thing. We are looking for consistency, and we are looking for a more mature security program. That is the goal, is to sell maturity, compliance, and let maturity and compliance dictate them buying your security stack. So now kind of to the workshop, right? So CMMC is a hot button right now. It is confusing. It's scary. It's not finalized, right? So one thing we want to make sure is, can I try my best to debunk some of these questions? Can we be consistent in our thought process on how we talk about these things? And can we debunk the lies that are out there? So one thing we wanted to talk through was, what is the C3PAO process? So I just want to paint the picture for you guys. If you guys are engaging with companies that are handling CUI, controlled unclassified information, and that CUI flows into your ecosystem, and you store and you process it and you transmit it, we believe, and there's verbiage to back this, and once the rule gets finalized, that you will be in scope yourself. So you will have to go through your own CMMC C3PAO process. Well, you got to go through your own journey, and then they have to go through their journey. And what does that journey look like? So let's assume you've gotten your system security plan in place. Let's assume you've engaged, you've got your technology stack in place. Let's assume you've got all the policies and procedures in place. You've built maturity. You've done all that stuff. What is a C3PAO going to expect? So now you've done all this due diligence. You've spent all this money. You've answered countless questions. You yourself are going down this journey. Your clients are scared. They're going down this journey. And now they go to these pearly gates of C3PAO land. And, maybe they've gone through a SOC 2 audit. Maybe they've gone through an ISO audit. This is very different, right? So there's kind of four very defined phases in CMMC land, and it's defined by the CAP. So whatever I tell you guys, every C3PAO follows the same journey. Nobody should be doing their own unique journey. Nobody should be cutting corners. Nobody should be offering value adds of, well, in phase 1, we'll also do this. We are all required to follow the process as outlined by the CAP. So basically, I'm reading you guys the CAP, but what my hope is that I can kind of instill some what's the word I'm looking for? Confidence that you're not going to just go in and fail miserably. We don't want that. None of us in the community want you guys to get up there, pay all the money, and fail. I will make a note that if you do get to phase 1 and the C3PAO auditor believes you are not ready, you do unfortunately have to pay us a fee, and you have to go back and fix things. So when we're preparing and planning for the assessments, what we're doing is we want to collect your evidence. We want to identify resources. We want to understand your schedule. How many times, there's a multi-week period that goes into before you even go in for your assessment, which could take a week or two, right? So it's a heads down, working with your team, multiple hours a day to get this thing accomplished. But all the time spent beforehand and afterhand is really where a lot of the work gets done. So before we even put our heads down, we gotta collect your evidence. I need your SSP. I need all your associated documents. I need to make sure I have access to all the stuff that I need. We're going to identify and map your cybersecurity postures. We need to make sure that we need to identify the scope. Scope is king. If you come to the assessment company and you go, okay, well, I want you guys to assess this scope, this enclave. And then we go, wait a second, Julia in accounting, I noticed she has access. You're like, don't worry about that. She's outside of scope. we won't even move forward, right? You fail. Scope is king. We need to identify who the people we're going to ask questions to, because remember, CMMC is all about who owns what. Okay, you own this control. Show me, prove it to me, and then prove it to me again. That's what the auditors are going to do. So in this phase of the assessment, all we are doing is making sure you are ready and getting everything set up for a really successful assessment. And again, you can get to this phase and fail. You can get to this phase and the auditor might go, it's a non-starter. I'm sorry, we've collected your money. You're going to have to get back in line, go work with someone else, go get ready, do what you got to do. We don't want that, but it is a real possibility. Phase 2, the assessment. Again, the assessment is going to be done. Everyone should be doing it the same. One thing that you should be able to take, maybe I'll give you a best practice here. You want to meet your assessors. That is the only thing that will differentiate an assessment from another assessment. Again, they cannot do it differently, but they all have different personalities. So it's very important to meet your assessor, vibe with them, get to know them, make sure you like them. They are not going to cut corners for you. They are not going to be easier on you. You want a hard assessor, but you don't want the high school bully, right? So just a food for thought, right? Meet your assessors, because once they're in this assessment mode, you are handholding. They're going to handhold you for 40 to 80 to 100 hours, sometimes 200 hours, depending on how large your scope is, and it's a very intimate engagement. So right in this part of the phase, we're going to be examining and analyzing the assessment objectives, right? So remember, there's 110 controls. There's 320 assessment objectives. If you are not looking at the A, B, C, or D, so I'm going to steal this from a certified assessor in my ecosystem that I love. He says, okay, the control is that you've cleaned your room. Have you cleaned your room? Yeah, I've cleaned my room. Wait a second. A, have you washed your windows? B, have you made your bed? C, did you clean your closet? D, did you put away your shoes? If you miss any of those objectives, you fail the entire control. So and this should be done way beforehand, make sure whoever you're working with goes all the way down to the objective level. Because even if you just didn't put your shoes away, but you did everything else, the room is not cleaned. You miss out on that control. And God forbid that's a 5-point or a 3-point. Those are non-starters. Those are non-poemable. Those are, that's an immediate fail, right? So we are going to be examining and analyzing the assessment objectives. We're going to conduct interviews. We're going to analyze the results. Need to make sure the right people are in the room at the right time. If I ask for a specific control, and that's John in HR, John in HR needs to be ready. He needs to be knowledgeable, and he needs to be willing to have that conversation to be able to prove to that auditor that control and those objectives are met. And we're going to analyze those results. We're going to verify evidence. We're going to report gaps. We're going to update the evidence review. Basically, we're going to start to score you. Remember, there's 5-pointers, 3-pointers, and 1-pointers, all that add up to 110 controls. And then ultimately, we're going to generate a final assessment result, and we're going to create our recommending findings, right? So that all happens in this phase. Again, everybody's going to be doing that uniform phase. This is I don't know if it's the most time-consuming phase. And again, just remember, there's only been less than 30 joint surveillance audits ever done. So could this process be iterative? I have no idea. This is how the cap is written now, and I'm kind of stating on what will happen. We've done lots of mock assessments. We've done lots of assessment like these, in general. So these are things that are best practices that we've seen and that are being done currently during these joint surveillance audits. But again, phase 2 is the assessment. So now we're in phase 3. You hopefully could breathe a little sigh of relief. You've done the audit. That assessor has either come on site, done things virtually, but you have gone through all 110 controls, all 320 assessment objectives. Now it is our turn to generate the assessment results. So now we're going to go back. We're going to finalize all our recommendations. Again, hopefully you have no poems, because if you do, that's kind of a non-starter. There are some verbiage out there that you can miss. Some 1-pointers, no less than 85 points, I believe, and then you have 180 days of a time-bounded time to get those poems, to get the poemable items reassessed to get compliant. You miss a 3-pointer or a 5-pointer, it's a non-starter. You fail, right? There's no such thing as a poem. And truthfully, you don't want to miss a 1-pointer either. I hate giving that feedback. It is written somewhere that you are allowed to miss a handful of 1-pointers. but you shouldn't miss a one-pointer. A one-pointer is a one-pointer for a reason. They're supposed to be basic cyber hygiene. It should have been something you've been doing for years. You should not fail. And ultimately, at this point, we're going to issue a letter. Now, I said the CMMC C3PO assessment is 4 phases. Technically, you should be done now. We have issued a letter. We have uploaded your information into EMAS. Congratulations, you have a C3PAO assessment. You are now bound to do that triannually. You must come back in 3 years and get that and pass the same assessment. You must show maturity. You must engage with your MSP. You know, it's sticky business for you guys because they need to keep that entire security stack strong and fluid. But let's say that there's POEMs, right? I mentioned that there is an option for POEM closeout and reassessment if needed. And essentially, we would support the POEM closeout. We would reassess. This is also your opportunity to appeal some of the POEMs. Let's say we failed you on a 3-pointer and you said, I disagree. You have the opportunity to put in an appeal and for that appeal to be resolved. Again, if that appeal is resolved, all is good. If it is not, you fail. But there is a phase 4 for those POEMable items. But again, it is not in my nature to say, yeah, who cares? Like if you think you're missing a couple 1-pointers, go ahead and sign up for the C3PO audit. You'll be good. You want to be a 110 or nothing, in my opinion. You want to run mock assessments. They're a best practice, in my opinion. Run a simulated C3PO assessment. Have a C3PAO come out and do a pretend audit so that when you come to the actual audit, you're like, this is easy. I've been here before, right? So we don't want to get the phase 4, but it is an option. So, you know, one thing, the C3PO process in general is confusing. It's never happened in full yet. Right now, the only assessments happening are JSVAs, which are being overseen by the DIPCAC. There has not been an actual C3PO audit done by a C3PO by themselves in the marketplace. You know, we expect that to happen sometime in 2025. But again, my hope and intention here is to be informative, is to be direct, and to be insightful specifically about the facts. I'm not here to say, oh, we think and I believe. It's just I'm not in that position. And truthfully, there's people way smarter than me that know way more than me that I'm just not in that position. So one thing I wanted to finish this out with is best practices, right? You as the MSP community, this is a market share opportunity that, in my opinion, is something that you should focus on. You should be investing money in marketing. You should be investing money in sales. And you should ultimately be going down your own CMMC journey. You should be getting your own level 2 assessment, and you should be going out and trying to gobble up these companies that are going after their CMMC journey. So this is just the best practice slide. I've already talked about all this stuff. When the C3PO is asking for stuff, a good best practice is to build a relationship with us. Talk to me. What are you looking for? Oh, I want a completed SSP. Oh, I want an easy way to gather documentation. I want to make sure I know who I'm talking to. I make it as easy as possible for the assessor. But you can have those conversations with me, like introduce me to your clients, introduce me to your people, to say like, hey, look, I've got somebody that I trust. But again, there's lines of delineation. I can't help. I can't guide. I can't consult. We can only act as the auditor. That is your job to consult or somebody else. But I can give you best practices to make sure that you don't upset our auditors or you don't upset whoever, right? So this is a really good best practice. Make sure you make it as easy as possible for the C3PAO. Again, if I can, I want to make sure that you guys understand the business opportunity here. I know we're talking specifically about what to expect when expecting an audit. Well, what to expect when expecting an audit and what to do to build this audit opportunity within your ecosystem, right? So how to leverage CMMC audits for success. In my opinion, you need to focus, right? And these are facts. Focus on DoD contractors. DoD contractors are in scope right now. The rest of the federal government, there is chatter that it's going to spread to them. But if you have a DoD contractor in your ecosystem right now, whatever they do, at some capacity, they need CMMC. And it's up to you to ask them very specific questions, which we'll outline very briefly, to make sure that they are to qualify them. And then sell through their supply chain. If you're dealing with a prime, hit up all their suppliers. Who their vendors, who's providing them the services to make them successful. You've just turned one sale into 5, right? Educate your staff, put them through the CCP training, put them through the CCA training, put them through the RP training. Get them knowledgeable in CMMC so that you guys don't look like you're making uneducated decisions and that you can help your client make better buying decisions. Do mock assessments. I just said that. A mock assessment is a fake simulated C3PO assessment done the same way a C3PO assessment is done. You want to make sure that that mock assessment, that score that client can take is a 110 out of 110, so that before they go to a C3PAO, they're full confidence level that they're going to be good. And then partner with a C3PAO. And then partner with other companies to build credibility. One company can perform the gap assessment. One company does all the IT related needs. One company is the C3PAO. As a team, as a collective team, you have a powerhouse sales mechanism to support the DIB. And that is something that we are trying to ensure MSPs are a part of the conversation and they're not acting as a bottleneck in the conversation, because it is the MSP that could destroy or absolutely make that DoD contractor thrive if done the right way. Questions to ask, right? So just couple tidbits as we close this out of what to ask to qualify your CMMC opportunities. Do you handle CUI? If they do not, prove it. Where does it flow? Create a scope for them. Because again, as a CMMC auditor, what to expect? I'm going to check on your scope and I'm going to ensure that CUI is in that scope. And if it flows outside of that scope, non-starter. CUI is the dictation for a level 2. A level 2 is as an audit. Level 1 is an self-attestation, and don't worry about level 3 because they're going to be very little companies and they're going to be done by the government is going to perform those companies. Those level 2 companies that handle CUI, in my opinion, are going to be the most revenue opportunities for you all. It puts you all in scope because CUI then will be stored, transmitted, or processed within your ecosystem. And ultimately, it's the toughest CMMC, business model, because level 1 is much smaller, it's much easier, but it still requires support from you all. Who's asking for the compliance? Is it their KO? Is it their prime? Do they want to just get into CMMC work, or do they want to do CUI work in the future? It's important because the way you build the scope is dictated if they handle CUI now or if they handle CUI in the future, and it is how CUI is marked. And educating the KOs, educating the primes, asking the right questions, making sure you know who is asking them to get this is pivotal, because then you need to go back and get those people to prove that these documents are marked the right way and that all the documents they handle are marked the right way, right? So that's important. How much of your business is DoD work? If it's 1% of your business model, maybe you get out of CMM, maybe you get out of DoD work. If it's 90% of your business model, why are you waiting? You need to start now. You're behind the 8 ball, right? Do they have any other certifications? Do they have ISO? Do they have SOC 2? I will tell you, they map slightly. They do not map 100%, but it is a good best practice to know if your companies have been through an audit before. And if they have not, to prepare them kind of using this information is pivotal, because it's scary to go through an audit, especially if CMMC is their first audit. And then have they done a self-certification? Have they posted a score? There's a lot of DFARS requirements that are out there. There's a DFARS requirement out there right now that's been out there for a while that has required companies to be a perfect 110 out of 110. I doubt there's very many companies who are actually compliant with that DFARS requirement, but it's a good question to ask. Have you done it? Just so I can get a gauge on, are you taking this seriously or are you not?
So that's kind of two questions came up. One on the 4 phases. We get this question a lot. What's typical length time? We talked about it's an ongoing process to stay compliant and get compliant with any framework. But did you have any idea on those 4 phases, what to expect, and which one takes longer than others, just to kind of set the stage if they start to go through this type of audit?
Yeah, the readiness phase is going to take the longest. It's probably a multi-week period, probably a week or 2 max, depending on how large you guys are. And again, it's at your discretion to give your auditor as much time as possible. So you can hit up your auditor and say, hey, look, our audit is scheduled for July 15th. And you can start having conversations with your auditor as soon as possible. Here's my documentation. Take a look at it. You want to give them as much time as possible. That actual audit, a week, 2 weeks max. I mean, it's a heads down type of thing. And then post audit, a week, 2 weeks max. So you should expect 30 to 45 days. Possibly a little bit less, possibly a little bit more, depending on how mature or unmature you are. And that is per environment. So if you have multiple environments, those are multiple assessments. They are done. They cannot be done concurrently. You have to be one at a time, right?
Yep.
So think about it, 30 to 45 days.
Got it. And then the second one was you mentioned prior audit experience. I think you said SOC and ISO, that they don't overlap, does give you some framework of what to expect, right? Is that just a general, rule of thumb? If you've been through an audit prior, you're going to kind of expect, what's going to happen here. And that's not going to be the same with a CMMC, but it does give you some type of, what life's going to be like. How important is that? Or, starting from scratch to CMMC, it can be done, but how much more difficult is that?
Yeah, I mean, look, and maybe I'm speaking directly to your clients. Like if they're an organization seeking a certification and they've got government contracts, an ISO certification is a point system for them, whether they've gone through it or not. It doesn't dictate success for a CMMC audit. In my opinion, it just dictates their how willing they are to actually be compliant. So I will tell you, probably 60% of the people I engage with have never done an audit before and have no intention to do so. CMMC is the only audit they intend to go after. You can absolutely find success doing that. It's just going to take more time, more energy, and full commitment from your team. Again, if they've gone through it, which again, us being an auditing firm, I'm seeing that more often because now the companies were doing SOC and ISO and PCI, they're saying, oh, I got this other framework. It gives me the notion that you're more serious. You've already done some of the work, but it's not a 1-for-1, right? Because remember all those objectives that live underneath the controls, you might pass the control that maps over from an ISO audit, but you didn't meet all the objectives that live underneath it. So I'm not going to say it's a deal breaker. It's just kind of one of those things that helps me see how serious you are in moving forward and the commitment that your team's going to put in to actually become compliant.
Got it. Great. Thanks.
Yeah. So look, you've got my information on the screen. Mark's is pretty simple, 2mcline@controlcase.com. My intention is this. We've got a relationship with ConnectWise. I want to be a resource for you guys. We want to make sure that if there's compliance audit questions being asked, that you don't lose out on the opportunity to sell them a compliance audit or a framework that could then push more IT stack your way. Your goal is monthly recurring revenue. We understand that goal. If I can help you guys push your clients to meet compliance standards, and we all live in this beautiful world of cyber hygiene, we all know we're not preventing anything, but if we could do our damnedest to mitigate, that is the idea that we should all have that mindset. So I think that's done it for Mark and I. We are open for more questions if there are any. If not, I hope everybody have a wonderful rest of your day. Please reach out to me. I'm extremely, easy to get a hold of. And my intention is to just provide you and your client success. So this has been phenomenal. I'm glad there was no fire alarm this time. That was wild. I've never had that before. But I appreciate it. So thank you guys.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Good evening and welcome to Navigating NIST and CMMC Requirements, Challenges and Opportunities for MSPs. My name is Hunter Smith and I am the moderator this evening, filling in for Shannon Brunston for anyone that actually joined the session live at IT Nation. Let me introduce our panelists for this evening. First, we have Brian Berger, President of Satellix. Brian is a cybersecurity visionary and inventor with over 13 cybersecurity patents. As the founder of pioneering security startups, he brings a potent mix of business acumen and technological expertise to tackle today's complex security challenges. Second, we have Mike Crandall, founder and CEO of Digital Beachhead. Mike is a 20-year Air Force veteran with a strong history of developing DoD information technology and cybersecurity environments. His company, Digital Beachhead, provides vCISO services focused on compliance management and is a candidate for 3CPAO with the CMMC Accreditation Board. Last, we have Michael Magyar, compliance and cybersecurity architect with Cyqual. Michael is a cybersecurity architect, cloud engineer, penetration tester, and vCISO. In the government space, he helps organizations implement technical, procedural, and documentation requirements for FedRAMP and CMMC. These gentlemen have an extensive background covering the NIST and CMMC landscape, and I'm excited to dive in and have a conversation with them around what they see as the challenges and opportunities for MSPs. I'd like to start by asking Brian to give us a little bit of background about how we got to where we are today with CMMC and NIST 800-171.
Thanks, Hunter. I'm going to go very briefly through these slides, and then this deck will be available to everybody, both in the stream here and then post the conversation today. Mainly wanted to talk about where we've gone from a time perspective with CMMC from NIST 800-171 under DFAR 7012 today, which is a requirement for all suppliers, to where we're going to head into the first quarter of 2025 with CMMC. The concept is still the same around protecting information from our adversaries. So the concept is exactly the same. A little bit of I would say consistency of behavior of the supply chain and the process to define the boundaries of controls in the supply chain is the implementation of CMMC on a go-forward basis. I'll go to the next one. Great. So as we start to look, as I just mentioned, today, the model is for the supply chain or the defense industrial base, as formally called, to self-attest against NIST 800-171 all controls. So R2 is the current version that everybody's looking at and using, as you can see up in the upper right corner. And that's the model. And then organizations need to upload their scores into SPURS, and I'm sure we'll have more conversations about SPRS here in our dialogue today, so I won't go deep on that one. And then we move into CMMC 2.0, which has a 3-level system. And so as you start to look at that, it's kind of self-explanatory here, but as you start to define who is in what level, the level 1s are the Federal Contract Information, or FCI. Level 2s are the CUI organizations, and level 3 are very special organizations. If you break that into percentage of market, almost 50% is level 1, almost 50%, the other 50% is level 2, and maybe a 0.5%. So I'll say 49.5, 49.5 or greater, 0.5% will be level 3. It's a very small percentage. And the controls apply based on your level defined in your contract flow down from your prime contractor. So it'll have clear definition of what you are based on the information being shared with you. We'll go to the next step. Timelines. Okay. Here we are in June. Nothing's changed in June except the process of response to the over 2,000 comments in the public comment review period. So those 2,000 comments have been, I would say, reviewed and responded to. I wouldn't say they're completely assessed and evaluated and answered, but they've been responded to at this point. So CMMC Title 32, the proposed rule process is in place and moving ahead. The DoD has communicated that the publication date for November 24th, November of this year is still the process, and the effective date is still March of 25. So nothing's changed on the timeframes. Effective date means it will start to show up in contracts, right? So we'll talk a bit more about the impacts of those today. So with that, we have some acronyms we're gonna hold up here on the screen and keep for most of our conversation today, because we'll refer to some of this and we'll make sure that there's at least a explanation of some of those acronyms that we all talk about.
Awesome.
Great. Thanks, Brian. So if I'm sitting out in the audience listening to this and I'm an MSP, I'm sitting trying to take in what's the actual business impact to my company. If I don't have any customers that are in the DIB, if I might, what's the impact?
Well, I would say one of the impacts would be if you have a client in the DIB, or you would like to get a client in the DIB, they're coming out and saying the MSPs will have to match the CMMC certification level of those clients. So as an MSP, you are going to have to go through the fun time of the 110 NIST 800-171 controls.
Yeah. So there's the internal impact, to the MSP on being prepared, and so the concept of you have to have equivalent or better controls in place to your customers is one that is really important to the MSPs. But that being said, this opens up new markets and growth opportunity for organizations, because there will be MSPs who decide to disengage, and there will be MSPs who decide to engage, and so I believe there's a big growth opportunity.
If I could add just to that, I think one of the things we're seeing is a lot of times the MSPs have two different types of customers. Some of those customers are expecting, their costs to go up as a result of all this extra compliance that the MSPs are going to have to do and put in place. And then there's other customers that don't expect the cost to change at all. And so I think one of the tricky parts for MSPs on the business side is navigating that with their customers and helping them to understand, if you have these extra requirements, that's going to be a contractual modification. Like, you're asking more from me, and trying to work through that and understand how that looks. A lot of times the defense industrial based subcontractors that the MSPs are working with are going to struggle to say, well, now, but I need to increase my costs to my primary contractor I'm working with. And the answer is, yeah, they kind of expect this. So this is a tough thing from the business side of working up the chain and expecting that the costs are going to go up.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Absolutely.
Well, so that leads to an interesting question, Michael. How does this position an MSP, strategically, if they are going to embrace NIST 800-171 and CMMC? Where does this leave them and put them relative to both the DIB and the non-DIB environment?
Yeah, I think Brian said it well just a few moments ago, where it opens up a new market. I mean, honestly, the market may already have been there, but what's going to happen over the next couple of years, especially, is we're going to see a lot of organizations, a lot of MSPs are not going to want to support these controls. So then the question becomes, which MSPs are willing to make that investment? And they're going to basically have a pick of their customers at that point for the ones that have this requirement. If, let's say, 10% of the MSPs go through the CMMC process, and that's only 10% of the MSPs that are out there that are going to be able to even support this. So I think it does open. Brian, I know you have probably a lot more thoughts on this. I think it does open some opportunities.
Absolutely. I can actually tell a story. I guess reality is always a good thing to talk about. Is we work with a lot of different verticals ourselves, and we have a higher ed customer that we work with who came to us and said, we have been discussing in higher ed the framework methodology that we want to support into the future across all universities. And they selected NIST HR 171 as the framework. And so it's an indicator of where this set of framework and methodologies for regulatory compliance under cyber are headed across other vertical markets. So, as an indicator of growth of business, just saying I do want to, or I don't want to enter the CMMC market may be a short-sighted, not a big picture view. And so for the MSPs to look at this as a shift of what I consider cybersecurity compliance and risk management for their customers, there's a bigger play here.
Yep. And I see that the discussion is CMMC is the front ground, the practice ground for all the other departments to move into. So the DoD and the DIB contractors are the ones that are going to struggle through and figure this all out. And then they can just expand it and say, that's excellent. We're going to use it at the Department of State, Department of Treasury. It's just going to expand probably pretty rapidly once it gets rolling.
Yeah.
So,
and I'll give you a
Yes.
flip side example of that. I was on a phone call with a smaller MSP on Friday, and the way that their architecture is set up, this would be very onerous for them to implement. Just they'd have to change a lot of things and how they're doing it. And for them, we were actually having a conversation of maybe this is not the right vertical for you to pursue. Maybe you can find another MSP that is going to go through all this and then find a way to offload this specific customer or a specific unit of this customer's business to that other MSP and still find a way to profit share or do other things like that. But it just may not be right for them. They have, 2 engineers. It's just not going to fit their business model. So I think it's about strategic planning, and the requirements are really going to dictate if it makes sense for you or not.
Yeah.
So thinking about the strategic planning, how should an MSP think about taking on one of these customers in the DIB? We talk about sort of the 110 controls and enhancing security, but it's also going to increase cost. What's this going to potentially do to their margin? I mean, how should they think about this?
I would say this creates, I'm looking at the glass half full here, right? So this creates an opportunity to provide additional skill sets within your MSP and differentiate your business out of the commoditized world, of typical competition for business. And so I think bringing new skill sets and even additional potential engineering skill sets or even designs, or you can even look at it as trade secrets for your organization that differentiates your business, and then the ability to charge more for it. So it's a bit of a land and expand model, using kind of sales terms, but where an organization would work with a company, an MSP can work with a company who says, I need an assessment, and then we start to look at the complexity of CMMC and the fulfillment of it. There's a lot of good work and capabilities that can be delivered through the MSP.
And I look at it as well that we go to our non-DIB clients and let them know, we can provide you, quote unquote, cybersecurity level to the Department of Defense as a sales tool. So you're meeting these controls. There's 110 controls. If you've met these controls, you're showing you have a strong cybersecurity framework behind you. So it's a value out. So while the expense might cost us up front, eventually, hopefully we'll be able to, recoup some of that, not only in having DIB clients, but being able to say, hey, look at what we're doing for, the Department of Defense. We can do that for you too.
Okay. I mean, so if you think about sort of the we've talked a little bit about the non-DIB customer and how this might be a sales opportunity for them. Do you think that there'll be a significant pickup and step up in that space?
I think so. We found specifically out in the marketing or in the manufacturing space that's kind of looking to possibly maybe sell to the government one day, but not really selling to them now. That they're seeing cybersecurity as something they need more and more before when they possibly thought, well, we're OT, right? We have a lot of floor equipment and a lot of employees that aren't on the IT portion of our equipment, but we're finding that they're kind of reaching out saying, hey, what is this all about? Do we need it? Do we not need it? We have no sales now, but we've always thought about it. So it's if nothing else, it's sparking those conversations.
Yeah. And evidence, the evidence around the cybersecurity frameworks and compliance with them actually reduces the attack surface for the organization. And so, Mike, you're talking about the cyber component of it. And I'm a 100% believer that if you button up your risk side, your cyber side gets the benefit, right? Yep. So the organizations that engage in this type of work will see a significant benefit on the attack surface. So ransomware, malware, other type of attacks, vulnerability, weakness attacks, et cetera, that's going to reduce the impact to them on threats coming into them. And so having policies, procedures, configurations done correctly, using high quality products, that do defense in depth. This is a big positive for organizations. And so as you talk about the commercial market, which most of the DIB is, right? So right. They're all commercial entities that service the Department of Defense today, and they do other work in the commercial off the shelf or COT space as well. And that they get this spillover benefit, which I think is really great from a results perspective.
I'll add one comment onto that. I think I'm seeing a mixed bag. I'm seeing some organizations that just don't, some customers that just don't want to pay extra costs and don't care about the security. It just depends on your customer. I see other organizations that, want to see that as a differentiating factor. But I think if we look at what happened in the last 4 or 5 years with supply chain and certifications, you look at like SOC 2 and ISO 27001 and how that has almost become a table stakes to do business now. It's very hard if you're an organization, especially if you are offering services. If you don't have one of those 2 certifications, you get asked about it a lot. Now, so I think we'll have to see how the CMMC, NIST 171, how that permeates the industry. I think the initial NIST 171 requirement for DFARS didn't really permeate because it only focused on CUI assets. It didn't extend beyond CUI assets to all your security protection assets. So as this now requires extension to all your security protection assets, I think this might have a rippling effect in the ecosystem, and this might end up causing CMMC to become table stakes the same way SOC 2 and ISO now. Now, that doesn't mean every single organization is going to require it. There's still some organizations that say, give me the cheapest possible thing, but you also have to ask if that's your market. You as an MSP, that you may be focused on that market, or you may be focused on the market that's willing to pay for better security. So I think it depends strategically positioning yourself. It depends on what your market is and what you're going for.
Yep. And I would add insurance. We've all filled out the 400,000 page insurance form in triplicate for 4 vendors, all hoping we get the lowest insurance. It helps you check some of those boxes if you've already done it through some sort of framework.
Yeah, definitely.
So you gentlemen have been out in this space. We've talked a little bit about the impact, about strategic positioning. What are some of the best practices that you're seeing and coming across that you think you would want to share?
Yeah, I'll jump into that, and I'm going to steal. I forgot if it was Mike or Brian's favorite thing of just oh, we'll write some documentation and then we'll be compliant, right? I forget what, yeah, right. And I think one of the things I see a lot of as I mentioned, you mentioned in my bio, I've done a lot of this contracting with organizations trying to achieve FedRAMP, trying to achieve CMMC now. And one of the biggest things in compliance is if you start with documentation, you're really going to hamper yourself, because as you start to go through that documentation and realize you have deficiencies, you're going to have to then go backwards and adjust how your procedures look. And then as you adjust your procedures, you're going to realize we need to go backwards and re-architect how we have everything set up. And so I've seen organizations in this just death spiral of constantly, years and years and years and years. And I think really what good approaches to CMMC and all compliance starts with is understanding your boundary. Like, what are you trying to actually protect? Maybe it is your entire organization, or maybe it's these 4 business units, or just this one business unit. And so I think one thing we want to start with is understanding our scope of what we're trying to become compliant in. We can outscope certain things. We have to be very careful. I think a lot of vendors try to say, oh, you can scope everything out. And that's not true. But understand what your scope is, understand what this is going to affect, and then really understand the big impact technical requirements that are going to cause you problems. I think if you don't start there and you go on the stuff that should come later, if you focus on, documentation, you're going to have to backtrack. So understand what your actual requirements are, architect appropriately to begin with, and then say what procedures make sense to accomplish the things we couldn't technically accomplish. Then say what documentation do we need to prove all this stuff. And I think that will avoid having to reduplicate your work.
And to tag on to that, once you've scoped, if you're preparing for the audit, the best practices we recommend is what I come from as the old school military guy from the Inspector General inspections, is to have a binder. It could be virtual, but it is laid out for your auditor. So control 1 is question 1. How do you meet it? You answer, I've met it, and you show your policy, and that policy describes in detail how you've met it. Then you have your procedures that you've stepped through. This is how I've met it. Then the next page is your evidence. This is proof that I have met it. And then, that gives them a flow through of the 110 controls versus, oh, I think that's Jim, or I think that's Bob. We got to go call this person. You can just give them this as a one-stop shop, if you will.
I think that's huge. And I think that, especially that third part of that with the evidence side, you're going to find a lot of deficiencies that you thought were good. And you're like, oh, we have all these logs. Anytime someone logs in or accesses there's a log of it. And then you go to collect the evidence and you realize there's no logging that you thought was going somewhere. Maybe it broke, right? This is where we get into continuous monitoring. A lot of organizations think continuous monitoring is like, security operations center watching your security. And that's important. But Kanban is also about making sure that all of your controls are still functioning properly. I am still doing background checks on my employees. I am still, I do still have the FIPS flag on my Windows VMs, applied, right? So I think when you start collecting that evidence, you're going to find 2 things. You're going to find that some of that stuff isn't as technically in place as you think. You need to fix it. And you don't want to find that out during the audit. You want to find that out earlier, right? Right. And the other thing you'll find is that you'll say, oh yeah, we certainly have audit logs of people logging in. And then you start collecting evidence and you realize we have it for this one system, but what about these 10 other systems that are also in scope? And then you realize, oh, I actually have to apply this control more broadly than I think. So I think that binder is huge, especially that collecting evidence beforehand. If you collect evidence beforehand, your audit's smooth and you have fewer problems. I'm seeing a lot of organizations now go through pre-gap assessments to see, like with the auditors, like mini assessments to see, are you going to be ready or not? I'm sure Mike, you can probably talk a lot more about this, but they're getting slammed because all these things, when they don't follow my advice, which is your advice of get this stuff in place beforehand, they are getting slammed because they don't have all this stuff in place for all of the systems. And that evidence binder is a great way to check yourself on that.
It's just an easy way to keep the auditors from asking questions. You try to answer them ahead of time. And to your point, the proof is in the pudding. So I can say I have 2-factor. I think I have 2-factor, but then when I realized for evidence, it was my wife saying it was me in the morning, and then I logged in, that didn't really count. So I better have better evidence of my 2-factor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sorry guys, I got dropped for a moment, so I'm back. But yeah, I agree with this conversation 100%. I think the pre-assessment audit and pre-assessment artifact collection and validation process is critically important. I think some other best practices, if I'm catching up correctly, around, asset discovery, design of the network to protect the CUI and FCI. As Michael's expertise around boundary management, if the organization has better context around these things and understands their cyber posture starting out, they can be much more effective starting to plug the holes or remediation moving towards their audit and certification. You never want Mike Crandall to come in, as he said, if you're not prepared, because you get to pay him twice. He's okay with that, but no, it's not a good one.
That works for me.
Absolutely. I'll throw another thing I'm seeing in there too. A lot of organizations, there's two approaches. One approach, like let's say you're an MSP and you have a lot of commercial customers, and maybe the way you satisfy that, sometimes you might use offshore non-US citizens to satisfy certain service-based delivery requirements. Maybe you have a lighter or laxer requirements around just even the networking and how you do that stuff. If you try to put all these controls on that environment, you absolutely can do that. And there's a lot of organizations that do this, but just keep in mind that you are going to hamper that a little bit. So we are seeing organizations try to bifurcate this a little bit. The problem when you bifurcate it is that, a lot of times you end up having to duplicate things, and that gets tricky. And now you're having to do twice the amount of work for all of your identity management and all these other things. It can get tricky to do that. But I think that's one thing we're seeing is, in order to not have to have your entire business follow all these rules perfectly, you still can apply them, right? But maybe you're not getting audited on that for your entire business. But there is this concept of an enclave, but we do have to be very careful, because a lot of organizations try to enclave down to something that they can't do, and their boundary ends up being bigger. So it's really important to make sure that you got your boundary right. I think that's a really good point you mentioned again there.
Yeah, know how your data flows.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know how you guys feel about POAMs, plans of action, milestones, as a workflow model, not a presentation tool to the government. So think about the POAM as it identifies where I have gaps and what I should do about them, and responsible parties and associated policy, if there is one, or is a configuration setting, breaking it down into English so you can understand it, a really good model versus compliance speak. But as the plan to move towards, I think Mike's blue binder model, is having a POAM to get you there, so you have everything assembled and prepared. Having your library of materials. It really is a good tool, as long as it's done correctly. I would say.
Absolutely.
So as I sit here and I've been listening to this for the last few minutes, if I'm an MSP that is at the front end and not already in the 800/171 space and sort of already looking at how I'm going to embrace CMMC, I've heard terms used like continuous monitoring and system security plan and plans of action and milestone. If I'm not in that space already, how do I get started there? How do I navigate the complexity that is CMMC?
It's a big list, right? I think we could all talk to that. I think we described a little bit the best practices that will help kind of move into that knowledge and expertise. But definitely work with a knowledgeable and quality organization that can help really drive a really structured model for working with your clients. And whether you're the client to be certified, or you want to provide services to your customers with expertise, working with an organization that has these skill sets will bring you the knowledge. So it's a train the trainer model. And then you'll pick out as an MSP where the expertise you want to provide in your own ecosystem and where you want to outsource it. Because this cannot be done by one organization. We can all shake our heads to that. This is a team effort.
It's complex. I mean, look at the slide we have up here. And some we're like, oh yeah, I know what every single one of these things mean. I can tell you the history of it. And half the people I talk to in this space don't know what half of these acronyms mean. It's complex. There's a lingo to it. One of the things I think is really tricky is most organizations open up NIST 800-171. And again, right now we're on revision 2. That was something Brian mentioned earlier. Revision 3 just came out in May. That is not the requirement at the moment. So just don't get tripped up on that. But I highly recommend, because you read NIST 800-171 and you're like, yeah, I secure my systems. Of course I secure my systems. I have a password on them. And then you realize when you go through an audit that that's not what that means at all. There's all this other subtext of, oh yes, you need to apply your CIS benchmarks or STIGs. And so what does that even mean, right? And how do I need to apply that? So I highly recommend, if you Google CMMC scoping guidance, the Department of Defense, the DoD CIO website is like the first thing that pops up. And I highly recommend reading the scoping guidance, especially for CMMC level 2. And I highly recommend reading the level 2 assessment guide because a lot of organizations are probably going to have to go, like Brian mentioned, half the organizations have to go there. When you start looking at the complexity of that guide, I think one of two things happens. You either read it and you say, I love this, and this is what I want to do for a living, and you're one of like the 4 people on this call, or which is rare, and that's okay. Or you say, yeah, I don't want to waste my day learning this whole thing for this, and let me offload that the same way you expect your customers to offload IT, day-to-day help to you as an MSP, because they want to do their business. They don't want to learn about IT. In the same way, there's nothing wrong with saying, I want to do IT. I don't want to learn about all this compliance, security theater stuff. So I think it's take a look at the complexity of it, and don't be, like Brian said, don't be afraid to ask for help from someone. So,
and if you're looking to do it, I would say also to your point, look at the CMMC assessment plan and process, the CAP.
Yeah.
So that way it goes through. This is how you're going to be looked at. It's like having the answers up front.
Yeah,
This is
it is
what we
the answer to the test. And don't be deceived by 110 controls, because they represent over 300 artifacts. So there's a perception in the market. It's only 110. I can do that. That's a small test. It's not. It's 3 times the size as the 110 in reality. And so when Mike Crandall comes in, he says, "Show me your 300 plus controls and artifacts." Your objectives. That's where the rubber hits the road for certification. And, that's where ask for help is really the right answer, because there is expertise. Not that, we live and love this. We've been doing it for a long time. I think I'm 8 years into this myself, but there is either a passion or it's a part-time job. Go for the passion side, with the guys who really are into it. Guys and gals, I'll say it that way.
Yeah. I'm with you with the passion, it makes it go easier.
Yep, I would agree with that. So before we move to some takeaways and open it up for Q&A, I want to give everybody an opportunity here. Tell me what the one biggest myth or misconception that exists today in your mind around CMMC looks like. Right? We've talked a lot about what it is. Let's talk for a minute about and maybe help dispel a few of the first questions that might come in.
For me, it's the CMMC is never going to happen.
Yeah, revision 1 died. Why won't revision 2 die?
It's bound not to happen. But I like to point out that, knowing the government, 2017, 2018, when this kicked off and everybody panicked and, hey, we need to have that happen now. If you read it, it was like, we need to have this implemented by 2025. That was in their original, scoping. So what's the government going to do? They're going to wait till 2025. So it really was a lead in and supposed to give us this prep to get ready for now. But, because they kept getting excited and then not excited and excited and not excited, it's happening tomorrow. It's not happening tomorrow. We've kind of fallen into this. Well, this is going to happen too. But they're serious. This is what they want to do. It's coming out.
Yeah, next year it's it. Like this is going. Something crazy would have to happen. I think my big misconception is around each of the controls themselves. I hit on this earlier. I think you look at what those things mean, and you read the control face value, and it's just, oh yeah, that's simple. Of course, we only allow authorized flows or whatever, the controls we're looking at. And I just really want to, hit on the fact that they're a lot more complex than those 10 words mean a lot more than they might seem like on face value. And right. And like a great example, I think, is FIPS. And, it's like, if you don't know what FIPS is, definitely ask for help on this, because that's going to hit you hard, where you have to re-architect everything. FIPS, Federal Information Processing Standards, and the requirements for encryption for the government. And so, a lot of people say, well, look, we have really strong encryption. We use this, we rolled our own internal library that has got the strongest encryption in the world. It's better than the NSA. And it's like, that's great and all, but was it sent off to a lab by NIST and certified by NIST to be compliant with their things? And so there's a difference between FIPS compliant algorithms and FIPS certified algorithms. And that hits people hard, because all of a sudden, all those own libraries that you roll for crypto, you either have to get them certified and go through that delay process and spend all that money, or you realize maybe I should just use the Windows crypto provider, or maybe I should just use the version of OpenSSL that is already FIPS. But then you have problems of, well, I have this old firewall, or I have this old Wi-Fi, and I want that to be part of my boundary and part of one of my assets. And that may not support it. You may have to go buy a whole new firewall stack. Your NAS or your storage at rest, you might have to buy a whole new one if you were going to rely on that for encryption and it's not NIST validated. So I would just say again, like, start with the technical things, start with your architecture, don't understand what the controls are. But if you start writing documentation step one, you're going to be in trouble. Go through that assessment guide, as Mike mentioned, go through the audit plan, because that's going to show you a lot more of what actually is going to have to happen here. And you can get ahead of your problems before you have them in the middle of an audit.
Mine is, it's two, but they're almost the same. One is it's one and done. I'll get to it. I'll get it done. It's not that big a deal. Our experience is it takes between 12 and 18 months to meet a level of compliance to go through an audit with a C3PAO. That means everybody on the phone or anybody watching this who hasn't started is already late if they're going to be prepared for the launch of this in 2025 March, right? So we're already under the gun. We're behind organizationally. And so get started, get some help, ask some questions, start the process. And because evidence that we've seen across several hundred customers, 29% compliant out of the gate when we measure them. That's a long way to go. So think about that on the artifact side. So 29% of over 330 artifacts, somebody do the math, that's 60. So you got 270 to go.
Yeah, I was going to say my favorite is the belief that somebody took the notion that everyone in the chain has to actually be CMMC certified, and you're only certified at the level of the lowest individual in the chain. And they took that to mean, well, if I go and I get a CMMC certified tool, that I'm CMMC certified at that level, right? That's probably one of the best interpretations I've seen. And I'm like, no, I think it leads to the notion around a few of the key takeaways here, right? Is that CMMC is a journey, right? It's not something that you can buy or do once, or you get, I buy a tool and I inherit it, right? I think, Brian, you were spot on when you said, MSPs should figure out and find and work with quality partners and providers. I think that's key. I think it's a daunting exercise, and I think it could be even more daunting if you think that you're going to try to do this all yourself. Right?
I want to latch on to what Hunter said, because that's 100% right. I was on a call this morning with a large defense company, defense contractor, and I was working with a customer that was going to do some work for them, and so there was a concern that CUI might end up in this app. And what's interesting is the original ask by the procurement department of the defense contractor was just be in GovCloud inside of AWS, because GovCloud's got FedRAMP and CMMC and all this, all those controls. So then you'll be fine if you're in that environment. And we're like, you don't realize what you're about to set us up for the landmine that will be later if this is how you want to accomplish this. And so, there was a lot of discussion there. Once we got their compliance team on, it was like, oh, we have to get certified. We knew this. We, got to that conversation point. It was like, yeah, if you want to put CUI in our environment, we're going to have, it's not just us in GovCloud. We're going to have to get certified too. Are you really asking for that? Because that's going to change your contract price. And after discussing, it was, okay, well, let's put controls in place to avoid CUI getting in there. Let's have good information spillage procedures. So if CUI does end up in there, that we can then, this wasn't a security protection asset, so we're okay. But, that put controls around it so that we don't have to necessarily go through all that same certification process. But I think that's a huge misconception. Every single layer is going to have to be certified if you're going to use it, for that. So it gets tricky.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and look, I think the key takeaway is MSPs are likely going to need CMMC certification, just like their customers, right? With that, we will open it up to any questions. We've got a few minutes left for Q&A.
So how do you spell CMMC?
Well, so look, I'll ask one. You hear a lot of times people try to use the terms FedRAMP Moderate and CMMC synonymously.
Yeah.
Right. Where does that separation occur and why?
CMMC is the certification based on NIST 800-171 framework, and it's for defense contractors, people that work directly with the Department of Defense. So FedRAMP and FedRAMP Moderate is a cloud-based certification to work directly with the government. So FedRAMP is your cloud hosting and cloud people that work within the cloud environment, and that gives them permission to work with the U.S. government. So the CMMC is the contractor themselves.
Perfect.
And
Yeah,
FedRAMP being based on, FedRAMP being based on 800-53, NIST 800-53, which is a much larger thing. FedRAMP has 400 and for moderate, it's like 420 something controls. That's the main controls, the same way you have 110 for CMMC. And so then when you look at the actual sub requirements, you're looking at thousands, right? So like a normal SSP, like when I write SSPs for FedRAMP for organizations, they're literally 1,000 pages. It's literally 1,000 pages of documentation, and that's not even getting into their policies and procedures. FedRAMP is big. So, understanding whether or not that applies to you is a big piece of this component. Is that requirement because you are offering a cloud service to the government? That changes things versus if you are receiving CUI from the government, processing it internally and working through it. And that's, that's going to be more on the NIST 171 CMMC side. So big difference.
Yeah. So kind of at the basic terms, if you're SaaS or cloud service provider, that's where FedRAMP is going to be a consideration.
But I think they get confused, Hunter, in the sense of part of CMMC is you have to use a FedRAMP Moderate cloud service provider if you have a cloud provider giving you service. But you, the DIB, don't need to be FedRAMP. You just, if you're using a cloud service provider, like Michael said earlier, I'm going to be in AWS government cloud. Awesome. That's part of it, but that doesn't get you CMMC.
Hey, Hunter, I read a poll this morning on Gartner, and I want to share some of the results. It was about CMMC, just since we have a minute or so. And so, and this was the most challenging tasks poll for CMMC and a response from the community within Gartner. And so, continuous monitoring, 31%. So we talked a bit about that. Scoping of CUI and FCI, 41% responded as a concern. No SSP or an incomplete SSP, 53%. So that was the winner. So if you want to think about these things. Implementation of technology, 46%. So MSPs, listen to that. That's where the business is, right? That points right at it. And asset management, 35%. Executive buy-in was low, 22%. And then implementation of controls, 17%. So low, right? So there's some meaty parts of that survey. It's anecdotal, but I think it's telling of what the end customer, your end customer as an MSP, is thinking about.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. For anybody watching, you feel free to scan the QR code that you see, and you can get access to these slides. You can certainly post any additional questions, and someone will actually get back to you with an answer. And we thank everyone for tuning in to listen to us this evening. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Hunter.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. Thanks for joining us today. Joining you today from a busy airport here. Travel delays meant that this live stream got off to a late start, but I appreciate everyone sticking around and, more importantly, having the opportunity to run through the session that was quickly abrupted thanks to the fire drill that we had to go through at IT Nation Secure. This is a slightly different topic to security when we're talking about payment security. Payment security, I think, is a critical part of the function of every business now that we have obviously greater increases of fraud relating to financial services, whether that's check fraud, ACH fraud, or direct debit fraud for those that are dialing in from Australia or other parts of the world. There's a great opportunity here for us to think about how payments and the structure of payments could potentially be secured by technologies. And that's something that obviously is near and dear to my heart, having created WiseSync and WisePay to simplify and streamline payments for my MSP that I run for over 15 years. So here we are today. My name's Paul McNeil, for those that haven't met me before. The VP and GM of payments here at ConnectWise. My role here is to help guide the payments ecosystem, the way in which we go to market, and more importantly, to create value for businesses that use our products and technologies through integration and the capabilities that we cover off on. Today's agenda, we're going to cover off on 6 key topics. Why payment security matters more than ever today. Touched on a few of the key points there. Securing your customers' transactions and best practices. How to identify whether a payment platform is secure. PCI compliance explained. Not going to go into great depths, more just how you can try to avoid having to have levels of PCI compliance in your business. Establishing trust in your customers via payment security and what that can mean for your business in payments and cash flow. And more importantly, we'll cover off on a quick insight into one of our customers' CIO landings strategies and how payments have helped them to streamline and manage their cash flow through acquisition. As I mentioned, WisePay is a core product that is part of the ConnectWise ecosystem, built for MSPs and, more importantly, integrated tightly into ConnectWise PSA. We help businesses by prioritizing security first and, more importantly, thinking about the way in which you collect payments is critical and, more importantly, is a core focus of ours when it comes to the way in which we help you in your business. So why payment security matters more than ever? Well, first of all, I think it's important to understand that payment security doesn't stop and start with credit cards. Payment security is the way in which you handle all payments, whether that's checks in the mail, whether it's ACH or credit card information that's stored, whether it's stored in secure vaults or stored in ways in which maybe might put you at risk if those informational stores were to be accessed by unauthorized people. What we do know, though, is there is an ever-increasing amount of fraud, and fraudsters are always looking for ways in which they can attach credit cards to payments and receive, for instance, offline refunds or other areas of the business, which comes to the foundation of what WiseSync and WisePay is here for. We built the integration to work with third parties that are completely separated from the ConnectWise platform. So that means that things like credit card details and bank account details are tokenized with PCI compliant, bank accredited providers that essentially store that information in in their systems to meet compliance requirements, but more importantly, work only in tokenized payment methods. So what that allows is the benefit of having those core, those critical, and more importantly, those pieces of information that need to be handled with care, handled by people, and more importantly, companies and corporations that have the best systems and technologies in place to properly secure that. If we think about some of these headlines, over 46% year-over-year increase has essentially been the global fraud reported outcomes, essentially. So looking at credit card fraud as a core risk associated with that. And what that means to your business could be something as simple as if you offer payments to companies to pay for technology, whether it's laptops or computers or things that specifically you provide service for. You need to be careful when working with customers that you may have the right customer, and more importantly, that customer is essentially the customer that you know and do business with on a periodic basis, that you've verified them, and more importantly, you've reduce the risk associated to your business. I'm going to come to a point there which we work with another partner locally on, which debunks some of the controls that they had in place as well. If we think about some of that risk and the greatest proportion of risk, that's coming out of the US. And the US is probably one of the largest markets that still uses credit cards as a primary or essentially actually a secondary payment method, because checks still represent significant proportions of the economic flows through the banking system in the US. But 46% of that risk actually comes from the US. So there's an interesting statistic for you there as well. And that's because a lot of the new technologies, a lot of the new mechanisms of e-commerce are moving online. So as your business transitions to online, you need to be aware and foundationally understand that risk and fraud is related to the payment methods that you accept. If we look at how much that relates to, $34 billion in 2022, and that fraud taking loss up to 36%. So that means that the merchant was accountable for that loss. So as a company that has payment services that you subscribe to, whether that's through a merchant account directly with your bank or via a third party, such as the company we work very closely with, then that is going to be an opportunity or a risk associated with that particular fraud. So if you had a situation where you provided some services, some laptops, whatever it might be, to a company that didn't end up being the right company, maybe there was a long-tailed attack against you from a fraud perspective, they received the goods, but that credit card that they used for that particular transaction might have actually been stolen, could result in a chargeback to you for that particular transaction, and in turn result in loss to you of not only the costs associated with the hardware, but obviously the return of those funds to the card holder, essentially that had that fraudulent use reported. So there's a really important part of your processes and understanding what you need to do to drive that particular outcome. So thinking about the core areas here, check fraud obviously is a key risk. Just speaking with a partner who yesterday mentioned to them that they're in Atlanta, Georgia, have one of the highest incidents of mail theft in their country. And he said, partners or their clients are sending them checks and they're just going missing. He even had one mail item appear in what looked like a plastic envelope that had been chewed by a dog, had corners ripped off it. It was fully open. And of course, that mail had nothing in it. So, that check that had been sent by the customer had been taken out of that envelope, out of that plastic envelope that the customer had put it into. Interestingly, for this partner, he was looking at how he could better secure his payment methods, and the option there for WisePay to secure ACH payments provided him with the opportunity to start having conversations with his customers around payment methods that were secure, giving them the option to save a bank account or credit card in a secure vault, gave them confidence knowing that they're not having to worry now about mail theft, about check fraud, about these theft issues that are occurring in the US. And this is something that is really paramount to the way in which we do business. Gone are the days of waiting 7 to 10 days for a check when you can have those funds in your account next business day through these electronic payment methods. So ACH is still an electronic method, although it does transmit through the banking systems in a fairly archaic way, but it does give you the opportunity to electronically save and secure those payment methods, essentially, which are actually written on the bottom of a check that is sent through the mail. So that's a risk associated with sending checks, is that they're actually exposing the routing and account numbers that form part of the transactional interactions between banks. So you could quite easily take those account details and transact against them using ACH transactions. Now, obviously, banks are starting to work on technologies that help to prevent that. So a lot of banks now will have what they call ACH blocks to prevent the transaction being processed without authorization. So in order to allow a transaction, the recipient needs to add an ACH transaction user ID to their banking system, which is normally done electronically, and then focusing on how you can actually drive that straight through into the transactional processes. There's a number of areas there where this does create some simplification for partners and businesses. as a business and as just actually as an individual, I just love to know that things are being paid, paid on time. My credit card statement, there's nothing worse than having your credit card statement not paid because you forgot to make that transaction. So I love to have things on auto debit, and that's an opportunity where WisePay can help to solve that by allowing businesses to set up those automatic payments and for you to have control around how and when those payments occur through ConnectWise PSA. Simplicity is obviously helping to not only secure your cash flow, but also to help your clients pay their bills on time. And in most cases, clients are just happy for the simplification of their job too. The job to be done is for them to pay you. And that's essentially one of the things that helping the technology to deliver that in a secure way is foundation. And that's where I think it's important for us to consider. We often hear partners that come on board, they may receive, a couple of hundred checks in the mail, and they've got machines that help them to scan that, deposit that into their accounting system. But the reality of it is you just need to avoid receiving those old style payments anymore, moving more towards ACH, which gives clients the opportunity to pay in a low cost way, especially if you're passing through the credit card fees, which we're seeing more and more companies take that as an option in the configurations of our systems to be able to pass through that credit card. Obviously credit card fees can range anywhere from 3 to 4%, especially for the high value cards that we see transacting through our systems. They're called tier 5 cards. They're the black, platinum, triple reward point cards that you'll see partners presenting because it's going to pay for their next holiday to Hawaii or Fiji because of the way in which those products accumulate points. So there's just some of the key points they're thinking about how check fraud is actually a theme that we start to talk about with new customers coming on board, how you can actually position payments to be secure, but more importantly, the security of that payment information is not something that you take lightly either. You can point to the fact that it's secured by a company, a provider that is a industry certified and more importantly, reputable organization. And for us here in the US and Australia, that's Global Payments, which obviously provides that capability through WisePay. So we think about the best practices that surround your payment methods. So we're looking at simple things like, well, how do you actually protect your customers' data? And this becomes the story that we tell. As a business, I use this in many of the conversations that I've had where partners say to me, my clients just won't pay by electronic means, whether credit card or ACH, or even via automatic payments. They just want that control. And in running an MSP, again, having the opportunity to fine tune that process over many years, direct debit success for us came from two things. One, it was the ability for us to actually stand back and look at what the problems we were trying to solve. That was reconciliation of payments to invoices, but also looking at the problems that our partners are trying to solve. So that conversation started early during the quoting process, where we would actually talk about simple things like, the services we provide, whether that's Office 365, internet connection, staff augmentation, hardware as a service, the list goes on and on. The foundation of that service that we provide is normally backed into third-party services that we buy, Office 365 licenses, internet connections from our telecommunications provider, whatever they may be. They require capital. They require your cash flow to make those payments to your providers to service those particular invoices that are issued. And I always have that conversation with my customers and say, well, the reason why we need you on autopay, or why you need to be on autopay, is because those services are not optional. They're not something that we can opt out of, not paying an invoice for. If we don't pay the invoice, you don't receive the service, and it also could impact other customers of ours too. So we talk about that in the way in which security frames up the function of the business, the security of cash flow in business, and more importantly, the foundation of the way in which we do business generally. If you don't have the cash in your bank, you can't pay payroll. And that's the sort of things that we talk generally about during the quote process. If there's ever a resistance towards automatic payments or having those payment methods saved on file. So we sort of think about that productively towards 2 points of reference. One is having the information saved is secure. You don't need to send a check. Two, having that paid automatically saves you time, customer, because you don't need to worry about having to remember to make that payment. because ultimately, if you're late making payment, that could result in a reduction or an interruption to service of your services. And we don't want that. We need to make payroll, and that's the mechanisms in which we ensure payments are flowing through our systems. The second part, which is fairly new to the US, or more so becoming more commonplace. 10 years ago, when we launched WiseSync, and probably in the last 5 years, probably last 3 years post-COVID, we've seen an uptake or an increase in the number of partners that are looking to pass through the credit card surcharges. We've seen changes in legislation. We've seen the differences in the ways in which people approach fees, whether it's a cash discount removal or whether it's a surcharge disclosed at the time of transaction. We just make sure that you disclose that information clearly and upfront. So even throughout the quotation process, letting them know that the prices you're quoting are cash-based prices. And if you wanted to pay by an electronic payment method, such as a credit card, there is a payment or an increase there, which essentially is a cash discount removal. We've found that in some states that is quite agreeable or possible. In other states, you still need to think about how you might approach that as just a global price increase rather than having that payment sort of specified in a separate transaction. The benefit to you, though, is quite simple. Credit cards cost a lot of money. 3.5% of your top line revenue, which essentially is what it costs to process a transaction, could be as much as 58% of your payment, of your gross margin from that particular product that you sold. So Office 365, very low margin. If you're taking a 3.5% cut of the top line, that could be 50% of your margin gone just to a credit card payment. So having the ability to pass that through securely and, more importantly, foundationally, is quite an important part. Finally, they're reducing the risk of fraud. When you secure payments in systems that essentially you don't have access to, you're giving the business the opportunity to then limit or reduce the scope in which the risk is associated to that. So we call that a risk reduction, because you don't have access to that information that the customer keyed into. You're not storing it in the tickets or emails or content or communications that are sent by the customer. You can simply direct them to make payment directly to the platform via a variety of different ways. Again, not handling the payment method is the most important part of that journey. So sort of thinking about the three key areas that we spoke of: reducing payment fraud risk by using payment methods that don't need to disclose data to anyone. You do not want a credit card emailed to you via a ticket. You don't want to be asking for that over the phone, especially in many cases. A lot of lines now are recorded and create PCI compliance scope increases. So again, doing whatever you can to have the customer go to your customer portal, click to make payment, sending them the invoice with a payment link. There's a variety of different ways in which you can avoid handling that payment data. Reducing fraud risk by having that direct relationship with your customers, having them save that card, authorization is collected, terms and conditions are accepted, signatures are captured. That's one of the most important aspects of that authorization flow. Having things like paper checks floating around the office, like I said, paper checks have the account and the account and ABA numbers on them, or I've just lost my train of thought there. The US banking and routing numbers are essentially printed on checks, gives you that foundational risk associated with that information being in plain sight. And that's why mail fraud is so rife. That information is just like mailing your credit card numbers on a piece of paper. So we just want to make sure that we don't do that. So how you can identify? Well, I think the most important part is, well, how does your company prioritize security? Security starts at the top. It really does. From the moment when anything is created, we have to think about the secure mechanisms in which we process transactions. And the way in which WisePay has done that is by enrolling into limited access processes. So that means that we don't handle card data, we don't handle bank data. It's all handled via the secure forms that the third parties actually provide to us to facilitate the transmission of what they call tokenized payment methods. So your system should manage, or at least utilize, those tokenized methods. You should never have access to the raw data. You should never be able to query that information, because it's secure to you as much as what it is to them. So that's a very important part of that particular identity management. If we look at what are some of the other areas, the questions or frameworks that you could think about, SSL certificates, pretty standard table stakes in today's web certification processes. But the reality of it is the number of times we see incorrect certificates or no certificate or invalid or expired certificates. Does the company have the right level of authorization and authentication for the certificates that they issue? PCI and DSS compliance is a core framework of that. So that is the foundation of credit card management or the payment card industry, and the security standards that sit around PCI compliance is a foundational framework for the way in which card data is actually handled. That gives us the opportunity to then simplify the approach and making sure that PCI compliance is limited in the way in which you are then enrolled with WiseThink and WisePay. Using WiseThink and WisePay, it's really straightforward. We only have a limited scope for PCI compliance, and that is that you're not accepting payments in any form other than via a third-party compliant platform. And that platform, WisePay, uses third-party compliant PCI interfaces to make sure that even we have limited scope. So we want to maintain a limited level of capacity, because ultimately we don't need to have any handling of that information. Finally, or not finally, but further to that, two-factor authentication. This again is table stakes for the system in which we operate. Always having those two-factor authenticated, whether it's via device or whether it's via one-time code, making sure that all of your systems that have those extended accesses to see information like process payments, etc., are user verified, and more importantly, foundationally driven by security too. Having those regular audits, part of PCI compliance is that you have security scans and audits to meet those minimum requirements. Again, that usually forms part of your risk posture as well, giving you the opportunity to have the foundation of security outcomes, that is risks and mitigations, to understand what it is that you need to do in your business to properly secure and protect the information in which you process. You want transparent privacy policies, obviously giving clarity to people that use your product. They don't want to see obfuscated informational sharing or data transactional information. So states like California are really moving towards protect user data and making sure that you don't have access or don't sell that data across to third parties. And finally, how you respond is a key part of that. Responding quickly and effectively really creates trust, and more importantly, shows businesses that you are focused on creating the frameworks that are necessary for businesses to focus on. So if we look at what is PCI compliance, and we simply say you want to avoid PCI compliance elevation where possible, every business that processes PCI related data, that is cardholder data, must have some form of PCI compliance to a level of understanding in which you process that data. If you are handling card data, your PCI compliance scope will be at one of the highest levels. That means if you have the highest amount of data, if you see cardholder data in its raw form, you're going to need to have that information protected in ways in which would be similar to the companies that we integrate to. So that means you're going to have a lot more work to do to manage that PCI compliance. You're going to have risk and audits associated with that. So ultimately, how do you avoid it? How do you step away from actually accepting or processing payments? Your business accepts credit cards over the phone, then it is going to create more complexity for you. And that's one of the things that WisePay has been able to achieve through our in-person payments, with the creation and opportunity of, the creation of the terminal-based payments to allow you to have an in-person payment solution as well. For if you have a storefront or a requirement there to tap, swipe, or insert cards, it can create that opportunity for you too. If we think about what you need to do beyond and as required for security compliance, if you do have to process payments, or if you have a system that ultimately processes cardholder data, then a QSA is going to be required for you as part of that. The qualified security assessor is going to do a PCI compliance audit to the level in which you operate, to making sure that you comply with specifically the compliance requirements of that level. And as you process more cardholder data, have access to more systems, you're going to have more PCI compliance requirements that need to form part of that. So when we move into establishing trust in your customers via payment security, we have to look at things that simplify the way in which you build that trust, the level in which you establish trust, and the way in which you foundationally manage that information from a systems perspective. Giving businesses the visibility over how that information is managed simply by masked card data or masked bank account information, which is present to them in the customer portal, gives them confidence that the information that you hold is then held in a secure and compliant way. Protecting payments is simply more than just having a lockbox in your office for credit cards to be put into. It is an opportunity for you to better manage end-to-end the payment processes for you and your payers. So ultimately, it is a foundational shift towards how you move from the manual or analog ways into, more importantly, the processes that stand up for businesses that need to protect payments and, more importantly, their cash flow. Because at the end of the day, payments methods, payment transactions are only one small part of the journey in business. The cash flow is what drives your operational maturity. So finally here, establishing trust in your customers via payment security, as we mentioned, it really is showing that you've got the compliance and industry standards, that you have robust encryption, and that ultimately is going to create trust. You've got those advanced protection and fraud tools at your disposal to help you manage that transactional focus, and as well as foundationally giving you the opportunity to manage and secure your cash flow. If we take a look at one of our clients who is most recently part of a case study that we launched, a CIO Landing's partner success story helped us to create, or help them to create, the renewed focus on efficiency post acquisition of many companies. So they were looking to, as they acquired businesses, to ramp up, sending out over 200 invoices a month. That meant they had many paper checks that were coming in via mail. This company had to look for a way to remove that risk in their business, providing the business opportunity for them to secure their customers' security as well by saying to them, we're not going to handle that those paper checks. You need to enroll into our secure payment portal, saving your bank account or credit card, and giving us the ability to then simplify and transact that for you. There's a lot of wasted time in receiving checks. There's no question about that, even with tools and technology that help to scan and simplify the input. But ultimately, there's still a lot of process that needs to be managed, reconciliation of payments against invoices, and more importantly, the execution of that process on the client side too. Sending those checks costs money, processing checks costs money, and more importantly, it also opens up the risk of incorrect allocation and accounts receivable nightmares, where you then have to go back through historical transactions and find invoices that were paid that haven't been paid. I'm sure we've probably all been there before, where companies haven't properly allocated those payments to the invoices that are being paid. So it's been a really great opportunity for us to present to you some of the different views of security as it comes to payments. And WisePay is obviously a technology platform that helps businesses to get paid quicker, providing opportunities to secure the payment flow, give us the ability to simplify the collection of payments against invoices that are being paid, and more importantly, get that cash into your bank quicker and more efficiently. So make sure you reach out to us and have a conversation if you'd like to hear more about WisePay. It's just one of the simple examples here of clicking to pay. The client has the ability to simply click a link from an invoice you send from PSA, and that takes them straight through to the payment page. This is one of our most recent innovations, what we call the quote to cash lifecycle, where we've just launched this for CPQ, giving you the ability to have a payment flow inside of CPQ now that simplifies the collection of payment up front. So that gives us that capability to simplify the way in which you receive payments from up to 17 steps down to simply 3. The collection of payment, the creation of down payment, the application of the invoice down payment, the application of the down payment to the project or services after that down payment has been created. Again, unlocking functionality that wasn't previously available, only through that integration that we're able to provide directly inside of the ConnectWise ecosystem. So reach out to us if you'd like to learn more about WisePay, if you'd like to learn how you can streamline cash flow, and more importantly, offer a secure payment solution to your customers. It's a great opportunity for you to talk on how we obviously are going to process here. Look to look to see more about what you've got to see, sorry, would love to hear more about what you would like to hear from us, and especially when we're talking about security in the payment ecosystem. Thank you very much for your time, everyone. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day, and this live stream obviously helping us to connect with our partners here again after that, after our fire drill went off. Actually, there is one little thing here, which is the Vanson Bourne report. I believe this is actually from IT Nation. So I'll just bring that up quickly again so that you can see that. That's just coming through now. If you haven't already, you can download that report from the QR code from the IT Nation Secure event there. Thank you to everyone for joining in, and more importantly, have an enjoyable rest of your day or evening.